Great. Welcome, everyone, to the final session of the Investing in Africa's Future conference. We'd like to thank the Atlantic Council. We'd like to thank all the panelists today, including many heads of state, investors, U.S. government officials, and officials from the Development Finance Corporation. I'm Andy Herskowitz, the Chief Development Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, and we're here for what I think is the most important session, the launch of DFC's first ever development strategy called the Roadmap for Impact. This Roadmap for Impact is the result of many months of effort involving many stakeholders, hundreds of people, both within government and outside of government, to help us figure out how DFC really can focus on development and have an impact on a sector-wide basis. I'd like to introduce our panelists who are going to be joining us today. These are all great people who all share with you the really honest opinions about what works, what doesn't work, and what we need to do better. I'm really honored to be joined by our CEO, Adam Bowler, who's a person who really cares passionately about development. It comes through in everything that he does. He really has a great appreciation for the career staff. I'm a career foreign service officer, and Adam reached out to me while I was working at USAID. I previously was running the Power Africa program, which Senator Coons, another one of our panelists, helped create and establish and is one of the greatest supporters. Senator Coons also happens to be one of the architects of the BUILD Act that created the Development Finance Corporation. So we're really honored to have him with us as well. We're also joined by John Barsa, the acting administrator of USAID. John is a great friend and colleague, but he's also been a tremendous supporter of DFC. Talking early on, I remember when I first was appointed to this position and I was briefing USAID senior leadership, John was one of the first people to ask what he could do to help out, asking about whether or not USAID could send detailees over to DFC to make sure that we get off on the right foot. He's been a tremendous partner. One of the things that I'll never forget that he did is as soon as he assumed his role as acting administrator from USAID, he sent a note out to all USAID staff worldwide talking about the importance of working with DFC. He's been a supporter of helping create a new development finance fellows program that will have USAID and State Department officers come over to DFC to work for several years so they can really get a great understanding of development finance and do a great job of representing DFC when they go back overseas. And we're also joined by Dr. Vera Songwe, also a wonderful friend who we've known for many years, but has the most experience of all of us in working in Africa and in working in development finance. I first met Vera several years ago when I was working with Power Africa, and she was working at the International Finance Corporation. And we're really honored to have her in the role as Executive Secretary for the Economic Commission for Africa. Before we get started, I want to highlight for you all a couple of reasons why this development strategy, the Roadmap for Impact, is really such a big deal. There are 5 key things that I want everyone to take away. Number one, this is $75 billion. That's a big number. This is Marshall Plan level numbers. And this is something that's really just one piece of the US government's overall development strategy. We have USAID, which programs big money overseas year after year and has a tremendous impact. We have the Millennium Challenge Corporation. We have the US African Development Foundation as well. So we have a tremendous US government package, and this is something that's really quite significant. But the other key takeaway is what DFC does. It's not just about giving money away and giving grants. This $75 billion, the $25 billion that will come from DFC should all be paid back to the US Treasury. It should actually earn a return for the US taxpayer as well. That's part of DFC's triple aim: advancing development, advancing foreign policy, and earning a return for the US taxpayer. The other key takeaway is that our approach is a very different approach from what others like China do. What's really different about this strategy is we're not just looking to see what the outputs are going to be and how much money, what the inputs are going to be and how much money we're going to invest, but rather what are the outputs going to be and how are we going to actually touch people. Embedded within this strategy are actual metrics to see how many people are going to get access to electricity, access to clean water, how many people will get first-time financing or access to the internet for the first time. This is something new. Most development finance institutions don't count those types of outputs, and we're really going to try hard to do that. The other takeaway is this is a long-term COVID response. When I was co-chairing the COVID task force here at DFC, we were working like many others on the short-term responses of seeing how we could put money to work towards the healthcare response, to increase liquidity and get money into the hands of agribusinesses as quickly as possible. But what we often do when we're responding to a natural disaster or other significant event is we're thinking in the immediate. So it was really important to us at DFC that our very first strategy focus on the long-term impacts of a pandemic, not just how we can respond, but what steps we can take to mitigate the impacts of future natural disasters and pandemics. And then finally, and this is the most important takeaway, is this is a living document. It's the reason we reached out to so many people for input. This is something that we're going to learn from. We may adjust metrics up and down as we learn. We may change policies. We may change priorities. What people have to remember is that DFC ultimately is a bank, and we have to do what the private sector wants us to do. We can try to nudge the portfolio in a certain direction, but we can't force a private sector to invest where it doesn't want to invest. So it's up to us to make the case that the private sector can earn money doing transactions that are going to have a massive development impact. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our CEO, Adam Bowler. Adam, you just came back from your second interagency trip in recent weeks, and you really, really understand the importance of how the U.S. government as a whole can work together. What do you see the U.S., and I say the U.S., not just DFC, achieving with this new development strategy?
Thanks, Andy. And let me start, Andy, by complimenting you. Andy is our inaugural Chief Development Officer and was the drive behind Power Africa. So in the context of this conference, has spent a significant portion of his life advocating and really helping people throughout the continent of Africa. So I could think of no one better to drive our development strategy, Andy. So very well done. And today is a big day for you in releasing this in this strategy. Two other comments I want to make, and then I want to talk about the strategy. One, because I get asked this, and I think this is one of the most important things about the United States focus on development, which is continuity. And it can be a tough political environment in the United States, but this is a place where policy trumps politics. The truth of the matter is, and I know this is the case in John Barsa's case at USAID and across the board, but the priorities that we have, they're not Republican priorities, they're not Democratic priorities, they're American priorities. And I think the reason that matters so much is that means that independent of administration, you will see continued focus on continents like Africa, on Western Hemisphere, in Asia Pac. It's only going to increase. So that American commitment to development is very strong and growing stronger. The second thing I note is one of the key aspects of the BUILD Act that, as you mentioned, Andy, that Senator Coons championed, is the interest in working together as one U.S. government. And I think we have heads of agencies between John, between Sean at MCC, between Kim Reed at XM, State, Treasury, that recognize that it's not about our agencies, it's about the United States and our combined effort. And one of the things we've done lately when we go is we go together. And as Andy, you mentioned, we just completed a trip to part of Africa and the Middle East. And then most recently, I was in Latin America, and I didn't go alone. It wasn't a DFC trip. It was bringing the full tools of the United States government. And so I think we're at a nice moment here where people are not about their agencies. And we recognize, for example, that DFC is one tool, but together we're much stronger. As far as the development strategy itself, you're 100% right. $75 billion over 5 years is a massive amount of money. And our goal is to reach at least 30 million people in need. Our most important aspect of what we do is to increase the resilience of people across the world in emerging businesses. So what does that mean? That means, are we creating jobs and are we increasing per capita income for people? That's where they're going to feel it. And, when I think about our three strategies, driving development, advancing U.S. foreign policy, and then returning money to the U.S. taxpayer, they're very symbiotic. Sometimes people ask, well, how do you differentiate or how do you emphasize, what's foreign policy? Well, the reality is the United States foreign policy, perhaps our strongest focus foreign policy-wise, is our focus on free, competitive, transparent markets, the private market. That's the strength of the United States. And we recognize that as economies emerge, that's the strength of economies around the world. It's the most important aspect. So when we invest foreign policy-wise, we're also investing in the private market to advance these countries. And finally, our focus on returning capital to the American taxpayer, and we returned $750 million to the Treasury last year. Every single year for the last 20 plus years, we returned capital. But more important than the capital that we return is that means we're investing in sustainable deals. These aren't handouts to countries. These are countries that are building domestic capacity so that the value that we create sticks. And that's why that's so important from a development perspective. I think it's very important what you've done, Andy, in your strategy for Africa. I mean, we've got a clear focus, and this comes from a bipartisan mandate from Congress on lower income, lower middle income and fragile state countries. Africa, that's a significant portion of Africa. Over half of our investment to date has been in Africa to reshore Africa. And with the additional capabilities given to us by the Build Act, the doubling of size, equity authority, the ability to invest in both U.S. and domestic companies, what you're going to see is a lot more focused investment in a place like Africa. So we've been very serious about our job, especially during this pandemic. The team has rallied. We had in June our biggest board meeting. We do quarterly board meetings, our biggest amount of transactions ever. In September, we did the same amount of volume in transactions as we did all of last year. And the reason is because we take our mandate seriously. And in the context of the pandemic, people like DFC, but also USAID, MCC, XM, they're more important than ever. So it's not time to retreat. It's time to aggressively move forward. Andy, you've put out 6 sectors that are critical. Technology and development. More and more, when we think about development, we have to think about the technology area. We have a goal over half of our investments to be technology enabled because the digital side is going to be a critical area going forward. And it can't be forgotten because sometimes people think just of traditional development areas like roads and infrastructure. Healthcare, we introduced a focused healthcare group and just did a $6 billion call to proposals. Now is the time, and what we think in a place like Africa, what a wonderful time, like what was done in mobile phones, where there wasn't fixed line infrastructure and there was a big shift to mobile phones. What a wonderful time to skip some of the heavy fixed infrastructure that the United States has, that we built in the 70s and early 80s, and jump right to digital health, telemedicine, in-home services, all of the things we're moving toward that perhaps Africa can skip that step and learn. So I think that's a great area. Energy is going to be really important. We took a bipartisan comments around our nuclear approach. There's emerging nuclear technologies, and nuclear is different from what it was 20 years ago, safer, smaller, and more relevant to developing economies. And that's what we heard. But other energy as well, to provide cheap and clean energy for people in Africa. Food security and agriculture is another area that you outlined and is especially critical. And, I was just in Africa, I was in Morocco talking about next generation fertilizer techniques and how we could really get so much more yield. And there was a really, I think in a way, promising picture in Africa around current yields from an agriculture perspective versus where they can be. And it was 2 to 3 times easily just off of the technology that exists today. In my mind, that's a fantastic opportunity and one that we want to pursue. And financial inclusion, Andy, I think we have a huge focus on small and medium-sized businesses and on women and women entrepreneurs. And our 2X initiative, which is our women's initiative, has expanded massively. And we will continue to push and focus on that. We've combined with Ivanka Trump's WGDP, and I see massive strides forward. And already in Africa, we've massively expanded there. And then water and sanitation is the other area that we need to focus. If we don't have core infrastructure like water and sanitation, it's very hard to develop further. So those are basic building blocks that we're going to focus on in our development strategy. So
Adam,
let me stop there.
Sorry. Okay, great.
No,
so I was going to
Andy.
say it's interesting. The point about financial return. We've all been posting things on social media about this new strategy, and someone I went to high school with commented saying, "Well, great. That means that the way I calculate it, about my family is going to be paying about $300 for this. So I hope it gets a return." And I replied to him, and I actually always welcome these conversations. I explained, I said, look, this shouldn't cost on a portfolio-wide basis. It actually shouldn't cost your family anything, because not only that, historically, OPIC returns several $100 million to the U.S. Treasury every year. Now, we can make money in a lot of projects. There will be some projects that we just don't make money on, and that's okay. But on a portfolio-wide basis, while we might have to invest $25 billion, it doesn't mean that at the end of the day that money doesn't come back. Commercial banks will lend billions of dollars. It doesn't mean that they're losing money. You get that money back. And I think that's one of the shifts that people need to understand. That being said, and I'm going to turn to Senator Coons, who really has been such a great ally and who really gets it. And I remember our conversation several years ago before the Build Act was even introduced. We were in New York and I was working on Power Africa, and you asked my opinion about the creation of a new development finance bank. And I had a lot of concerns about it. And look where I am now. Here I am. So I get to work on some of the things that I was concerned about. And one of the concerns that I had was how we're going to be able to really make sure that we focus in some of the more difficult investment climates, the ones that often get neglected, particularly in Africa, where most of the low-income countries in the world are located. Development finance is not easy. It's not. The private capital goes where it wants to go, where they feel like it's safe. So we do have to do a lot of nudging. But in passing the Build Act, you did give us new tools. So can you talk a little bit about how DFC can effectively utilize these new tools to advance the development strategy and our mandate to invest in some of the more challenging investment climates? Senator Coons?
Yes, thank you, Andy. I just wanted to make sure that was to me.
Yeah, that was directed to you. Sorry.
First, thank you. As the Chief Development Officer, you understand the punishment that comes to those who answer my questions about what do you think of this piece of legislation we have in development. And to Adam and everybody who is helping make the DFC stand up to the vision, the bipartisan and I think compelling vision that underlay the creation of the Build Act. Thank you for what you're doing and for what everybody who has played a critical role in this development strategy launch is doing. To the Atlantic Council, to President Sirleaf and Macky Sall and Nyusi from Mozambique and from Senegal and from Liberia, respectively, all of whom I've had the honor of visiting your nations. And to John Barsa and Vera Sungwe, I will do my best, although I am a senator, to be brief. Across the continent of Africa, we have 54 nations that are, relatively speaking, making it through the tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic in a less bad situation than many had expected from a public health perspective. But economically, it's having a tragic impact. The World Bank's just said, I think 27 million in sub-Saharan Africa are being pushed into poverty, extreme poverty, with the impact felt hardest in the informal sector and in urban areas as a result of the pandemic. And I'm excited to see the ways that the new tools, the new skills, Andy, that you were just talking about, that the DFC has available will help build back on the base of what's available and possible in Africa in areas like food security, health security, and in other infrastructure security issues that'll benefit all parties. This is a strategy that will touch the lives of 30 million people around the world. And as Adam was just saying, $75 billion over 5 years is a significant amount of money. I've often reflected on the very first time I met Madam President, President Sirleaf of Liberia, now a decade ago, when she came to visit me as the new chair of the Africa Subcommittee. The first thing she wanted to talk about was a significant infrastructure project to rebuild and to restart the Mount Coffee Dam and to provide a sustainable hydropower to the whole region. And I have, at that point, the United States was really not in the position. OPEC was not doing large investment projects in infrastructure of that scale and had some constraints in terms of its abilities and its reach. That conversation, which she very politely and persistently pursued over several visits, and the fact that the Chinese were providing an alternative that had, let's just say, different standards and approaches for infrastructure investment around the world, led a number of us on a strongly bipartisan basis in the Senate to begin the work that ultimately led to the BUILD Act. The Development Finance Corporation, the International Development Finance Corporation, comes out of a sustainably bipartisan view of the role the United States should be playing in the continent of Africa and in development finance globally. A view that we can and should better coordinate with our allies, better coordinate with our partners in development, the countries of the continent of Africa, that we should do so in a more transparent and sustainable way, and that the initiatives that we're bringing should make a lasting difference in the lives of people. As both Adam and Andy have said, it includes a priority focus on those who are in lower income countries. And that means in particular across the continent of Africa, the willingness to invest and to launch projects that, although they may be a little bit riskier than the projects OPEC previously invested in, they are going to have significant returns, both in terms of human development and I think longer term in terms of the financial return. Endeavors like the 2X Women's Initiative that was just referenced by Adam are going to help mobilize more than $3 billion of investment. Much of that's across Africa in projects owned by women, led by women, and providing products and services that empower women. I was thrilled recently to hear about the technical assistance being delivered to the Tulumoye geothermal power plant in Ethiopia, something I know is close to Annie's heart, because this would be the first independent power project in Ethiopia, a nation with incredible geothermal potential, and the whole range of energy security projects, as Adam just referenced, that will be supported and sustained over time truly excites me because of the ways in which reliable power, reliable water, reliable access to quality healthcare, financial inclusion, and access to infrastructure and technology-driven development projects across $8 billion of current investments in sub-Saharan Africa will make a lasting difference in the lives of millions. So let me just thank the Advisory Council, the very capable folks in the ranks within the DFC, and the other agencies. As Adam was referencing, this has been an impressive display of working well together, both within the US government and with our development partners across the world, and in particularly across the continent of Africa. I am excited to play a role in sustaining the bipartisan support for the DFC and in continuing to build out and implement the vision that animated the creation of the BUILD Act so recently, and now this first great success of the DFC in getting out this first development strategy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator. Really, really appreciate your support. Just for everyone else's context, before I took on this job at DFC, one of the people I sat down with was Senator Coons, and the conversation was, what can we do to make sure that USAID and DFC are working very, very closely together? And said that he wanted me to get settled and said, you reach out to me at any time, anything I can do to facilitate that relationship. I'm really happy to report that I've had to do very little to facilitate that relationship because John Barsa stepped in as the acting administrator. And from day one, it was, what can we do to support DFC? This is one US government. And every idea that I've had, he's been receptive to, and he's just been absolutely wonderful, whether it was creating the Development Finance Fellows Program, making sure that we're providing technical assistance on projects. When there was subsidy, there was money needed to help support a project in response to COVID. John's team came through for us to make sure that there was money available to advance a project that's going to support agribusinesses in low-income countries. So we can't thank you enough. Oh, and John also demanded that his team and our team have regular meetings. He wanted weekly meetings, and I've had to push back on him. I said, John, that's a bit much for everyone, but we will do regular briefings. And we have been doing at least quarterly briefings of senior leadership in each bureau about DFC's pipeline so we can get ahead of things. So thank you, John. You've really been doing a tremendous job. USAID provided extensive input on this strategy. And I'll say it openly, for me, it was the most annoying input on this strategy. And I'm a USAID guy. But it was really great input because people really knew what they were talking about, and writing strategies is the bread and butter of what USAID does. And I was able to, I faced some resistance within DFC because there haven't been development strategies before. And people were worried about, well, what happens if we don't meet the metrics? And my response always was, it doesn't matter. People want to know that you have a strategy and that you're trying. And you should always set higher goals than you know you can achieve, and you'll be surprised that you'll actually be able to achieve those goals. And so thank you and your team for all that input. So now moving forward, it's one thing to announce a strategy. Now we move into execution, and this is going to be important. We have a 5-year plan here with priority sectors. Where do you think USAID and DFC can collaborate in a really different way and complement each other's work most effectively over the next several years?
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I mean, first of all, I have to go back to what Adam was saying earlier. This is all USG, so we all have our own capabilities to bring to the table. So DFC, USAID, Exim Bank, Millennium. I mean, it's a team sport, but it's clearly the close alignment between USAID and DFC is integral. It's natural. Certainly, having one of our superstar senior foreign service officers detailed to be the first chief development officer, how's that for a sign of USAID being all in on the DFC's future? So we're very happy to have there. And yes, okay, fine. We didn't get the weekly meetings, but the conversations we've had, we all agree, communicate at the senior levels, at the working levels. This is good government. I'm really proud to be a part of this partnership with you. So a strong partnership and alignment of our policies and priorities ultimately benefits both our agencies and, more importantly, the people we serve. That's why our technical teams have been embedded in the strategy's development and implementation, and why our missions are working closely with DFC investment teams to mobilize private capital for development objectives. Look, it goes without saying, private enterprise is a powerful force to drive growth, create jobs, and advance opportunities to improve the lives of people worldwide. This is especially true with the COVID pandemic, where economic resilience is needed now and in the years ahead. Economic systems are being challenged in ways we didn't even think were possible a few years ago. USAID is well positioned to support and leverage the $75 billion of investment that DFC is going to catalyze for critical development strategies, including COVID-19 recovery. We established the architecture for the long-term, flourishing investment climates that support economic resilience and enable DFC and private sector investments to thrive. Our programs support local businesses, and we help countries create the conditions for private investment and growth. We strengthen food security among the poorest households, and we broaden economic opportunities for people in their own countries. USAID promotes good governance and accountable institutions as key building blocks for an investment climate that is attractive. You need some of this base work done to enable the conditions for the private sector to come in and really take off. USAID and DFC have already developed strong institutional and programmatic linkages that we've spoken about in the first year of our partnership. So we've already done great progress ensuring that we are tied together in terms of our operations and the way we move forward. So, as you stated before, creating a development finance fellowship for foreign service officers posted at DFC establishing a global DFC liaison network across 94 USAID missions. We've accomplished a lot in these first couple of months. So clearly appreciate your leadership, Adam's leadership, realizing that, again, something that should be given, sometimes you need leadership to emphasize that. So the leadership from all parties talking about how we cannot work in silos, how we have to work together, how we have to share information. This is good government at its best. And again, I'm really proud to be a part of this.
Thanks.
We transitioned the Development Credit Authority from USAID to DFC, where it's now the Mission Transaction Unit, fully dedicated to serving our missions around the world. As of August, the transaction pipeline included 70 USAID-sponsored transactions that will mobilize approximately $1.2 billion to achieve development outcomes, leveraged from approximately $26 million from USAID. As I said before, as we detailed you, Andy, as a USAID Foreign Service Officer, to be DFC's first Chief Development Officer, we're regularly looking for ways to further build our staff's expertise in both development and finance, as well as continuing a robust network to ensure that we advance U.S. government policies together. I'm particularly excited about our collaboration on Prosper Africa. As many of you know, Adam is Executive Chairman of Prosper Africa and the Executive Secretariat is housed in USAID. We're proud to support DFC's new team of Prosper Africa investment advisors, and we look forward to working closely with USAID's new continent-wide Prosper Africa Trade and Investment Program. Together, we will deliver billions of dollars in exports and investment, and we will yield hundreds of thousands of American and African jobs by 2026. I'm also looking forward to our collaboration to support U.S. and African businesses and investors. For example, USAID is providing first loss capital to Stitching Cordaid with a $14.75 million loan guarantee from DFC. Using this financing, Cordaid will support small and medium-sized companies as well as microfinance institutions that are creating opportunity and prosperity in West Africa. This is exactly the kind of robust trade and investment support that we can deliver by leveraging our resources. Not only do initiatives like Prosper Africa and Power Africa advance our respective agency strategies, but the whole of government approach maximizes our interagency expertise to achieve development objectives in a priority region. And we have timely opportunities to continue collaboration in sectors like food security. This summer, DFC launched a food security unit with initial funding from USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. The unit will be the first ever financing team exclusively dedicated to advancing food security through private sector-led finance. In addition, to close up, we continue to jointly support several blended finance facilities for food security and agriculture through technical assistance from USAID and capital from DFC. The funding will create innovative financing facilities for micro, small, and medium enterprises that advance shared food security and goals and reduce the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. I just got back from Kenya and Egypt myself, and really it's such a promising time to be involved with these activities in Africa. We're extremely proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with the DFC in this framework.
Thanks, John. You mentioned the leverage that you got of the $1.2 billion with $26 million of funding from USAID, and that's a huge amount, but I'm pleased to tell you that one of the next things I'm going to be working on, and people always get nervous when I say I'm working on something, is going to be proposing something that's going to cost you almost nothing, because I'm trying to come up with a concept of the budgetless economic growth program, where USAID truly views DFC as not just America's development bank, but USAID's bank, where we can take USAID staff and identify opportunities in countries where it won't cost us any appropriated dollars to issue the loans, and really move forward to advance development metrics, whether they're DFC's development metrics or USAID's development metrics. So stay tuned. We're going to be working on this with you and your team, and thanks for all of the support. In terms of U.S. government, other U.S. government collaboration, before we move on to Vera and talk about our work together, I do want to mention that we're excited to announce with U.S. African Development Foundation, with CD Glenn, we've been working very closely to develop the U.S. Africa Ties program. It's going to be the U.S. Africa Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurial Solutions program. And what this program is going to do is it's going to target the missing middle, the folks who we really haven't been able to reach. And I'm talking about some of the smaller businesses. Generally, DFC loans don't go below $1 million. And we're launching a program that will target companies in Africa with loans of anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000, accompanied by grants from USAID ADF for between $10,000 and $100,000 to see if we can really reach and have that direct touch with that missing middle in these growing businesses and identify new deal flow for DFC. So we're really excited about that. I'm now going to turn to Dr. Vera Songwe, who is one of the most well-known and brilliant people working in development finance, not just in the African continent, but worldwide. When COVID hit, one of my very first calls was with Dr. Songwe and talking about what are we going to do as development institutions to really reach out to Africa. And so, Vera, I've always greatly appreciated your input. You were one of the first people I reached out to for input on this development strategy. So I want to turn to you with one of the most difficult questions, because one of the struggles that I've seen is our ability to really drive investments in low-income countries in particular. I'm wondering, what advice do you have for us to help us advance transactions in some of these most challenging investment climates?
Thank you very much, Andy, and good to be with you. I think we have been working together for so long now that I feel that we know each other well, and you know what I'm going to say. Again, to USAID, of course, Senator Chris Coons. I remember once you suggested that you wanted to put through Congress an act that said you'll create jobs in America by investing in Africa. I think this is it. And at the time I thought, interesting idea, but we do have that idea now. And so I think we're here. $75 billion is not exactly the Marshall Plan, but I think if we talk about leveraging the $75 billion to $350 billion, then we start approximating the Marshall Plan for Africa. And that's my first answer, is leverage. I think we do need to begin to look at how we can really crowd in the private sector, how we can use some of these official resources to ensure that we can bring in the private sector. And you've heard today from President Macky Sall and from President Nyusi of the amazing work we did together, Andrew, in Senegal, by leveraging public resources from institutions like the DFC today to ensure that we could take energy from 23% to 73% access in less than 5 years. So I think the target of the IDFC for 5 years of $75 billion is perfect. What else do you need to do, I think, in addition to leverage? And we're beginning to hear it here, is one USG. I think Adam talked about it. It's so much easier to be able to talk about, to engage with one agency than to engage with the multitude. We've had a lot of reference to China here and there, but I think one of the advantages is that there is one entry. And I think with IDFC now, you provide a good alternative for a one entry, one goal post. And essentially that is important because, you can leverage, you have such amazing capacity across US institutions. And again, we've seen when MCC works well and OPIC works well, the result is much better and much stronger than when you work independently. And I think that is what this is doing, and hopefully that can do even more. I think, Andrew, you sort of mentioned it laughing and said that your colleagues didn't like it, but it's also measurement. And I think in my comments, that was one of the areas that we talked about. If we can't measure it, we cannot understand what the impact is, and we don't know how to do it better the next time around. And so my sense is this strategy, because it has, I was looking, I think it's in Burundi or somewhere, you say that you're going to give 18,500 people, and I thought, okay, where's the 50? Because if you say 18,500, it looks approximate. You should say 18,550 or something. People access to finance, and I thought, wow, they have actually counted, And in Burundi, and I think I use the Burundi example because it's taking risk in some of this, really, really more frontier economies. You wouldn't see, a USAID going to Burundi alone, but I think a DFC as a combined USG effort going to Burundi does make the difference. It's easy, and I think that is part of the solution that we need to bring. Senegal, yes, doing great in doing business, and I think we do need to remember the question from your caller is particularly important. There is always a sense that when you invest in Africa, it's so risky. But there's tons of studies out there that show actually that Africa pays one of the highest returns on investment. And I think every energy investor in the United States can tell you that. So again, I think when we have these kinds of conversations, we need to put those messages outside that Africa has actually consistently been quite profitable. And I think, Andy, you said you give 750 million back to USG every year. It would be good to know how much you get from Africa to give back to USG, because that is part of the conversation that we must continue to have to attract private sector from the United States to Africa. It is a pleasure when we sit in Ethiopia to see US Chamber of Commerce coming here and saying, you know, we want to invest in Ethiopia. And I think those kinds of business trips that familiarize, you know, the US investor with the continent, and people like you, Andy, and USAID going out into the field together really then helps to sort of demystify the environment a little bit better. Yes, there are some risks, but I think the risk is actually much higher. It's the risk of the unknown. And Ernst & Young has done a lot of studies that show again that, you know, default rates on the continent are much lower than in East Asia or in Latin America. So I think one of the things I like about this new strategy is that you're getting into these areas which are, one, technology. We don't yet know enough about technology, but we know that the continent is innovating amazingly in these areas. And I think there is so much potential and possibility. And we need to understand how we come into that. And that's where institutions begin to matter. And I think a combination of USG, the Congress, we need laws, we need rules and regulations that sort of, you know, police this business of technology so that when we do it well. And I think, you know, USAID providing a strategy and policy advice and DFC coming behind it with some investment is exactly what we need. And then at the global level, of course, we need a conversation on what is it exactly that we're regulating in technology and how we do business in those fields. So my sense is bringing together these different arms of government, leveraging, providing this additional liquidity that we need desperately, particularly now to build back. We keep talking about the build back. There's no build back if there's no liquidity. And I think I like in the strategy that you're taking risk, you're taking more equity. And when you come with equity, you come with training. So that for sure is something I think we can do more. I think energy. I saw so many energy projects in Asia. I didn't see enough big ones in Africa. Maybe we can do more solar power projects. And I think that's one of the enablers for this sort of build back. And Andy, I know I'm preaching to the converted. So yeah. I think in some areas, let's focus and let's go big. Thank you.
Okay, great. No, it's interesting. The African Ties program is going to be focusing heavily on technology and innovation and entrepreneurship. That's exactly what we want to do. We realize there's so much great innovation coming from Africa, whether it's getting in early on the next M-Pesa or M-Copa. We want to be there early on because a lot of these companies, they don't need $1 million or $2 million or $10 million. They need just a few $100,000 to get started. We want to be there early to support that innovation on the African continent. We really appreciate it. I really always greatly appreciate all of the honest feedback, because that's the only way that we really move the needle, is if we're all honest with one another about what's working and what's not working. That's the reason this is meant to be a living document. And I said, partly joking around, that people were resistant to having metrics, but I always assured people we can adjust them. In fact, the food security portion of our strategy is really, really small compared to what I think we could do. We've only committed to $500 million. And I was pushing back on our food security team about that. And the response was a really, really good one. It was that we don't want to feel pressure to only work in really big economies. We want to be able to focus in some of the smaller economies. So let us just do this, and we can always revisit and always increase it. I said, that's the greatest argument I've heard from anyone. So we kept that at $500 million for now. But we have about $200 million already of pipeline in the food security space. So I expect that will far exceed those metrics. And I can assure you that if we are passing metrics or on track to increase metrics, just like we did with Power Africa in our first year, we tripled our metrics because we thought we were moving too quickly. We'll do the same at DFC. So thank you, everyone, for all the support, for all the feedback, and look forward to working on this together with all of you. I'm now going to turn it over to Adam to provide some closing remarks.
Thanks, Sandy. And as we end this event, a few thanks. One, thank you, Vera. Thank you, Administrator Barsa. Thank you, Senator Coons, for your leadership and support. And you know, John, you said it a few times. There's what's written, and then there's the relationships. And I know, in fact, I think our last conversation, I was talking with you, and you were in rural Egypt. And Senator Coons, I called you a month ago on an item, and you said to me, you know, I think I'm supposed to be opposed to this, maybe politically, but I believe in you and I believe in the agency, and so I'm all behind you. But, you know, those things, you know, they show what is real policy over partisanship, and within the interagency, who your real partners are. And I have to say, there's a real moment in time that's come together for DFC, and I'm very appreciative to be in the role and to be entrusted to take it forward. And Vera, thanks for the comments there. I mean, these are reflective of the kind of comments that Andy solicited through this process, because we want to hear people's views. And if we can't operate in a transparent manner and we can't drive that, then how can we ask others to do that? And it makes our strategy better. So thank you. Thank you to the heads of state, to the DFIs that participated here. I think the major takeaway that one should have here is, for years, we have lacked the type of investment infrastructure to be on the board. And when people would say, well, you're talking about China, others, where is the United States? Well, maybe we didn't have the best answer, but because of the BUILD Act, because of Prosper Africa, we now have an answer. We're new, but we are big time here. Our doors are open, and you're going to see much, much more. It's a response. So we're here, and we want to be that alternative. Finally, thank you to my Africa team, Worku and the team, for working so hard on this and for driving this. And thank you to Atlantic Council.
Adam, thank you so much. Thank you for that warm closing. On behalf of the Atlantic Council, I'm the Executive Vice President here, and I just want to thank you all for joining us for what has been a remarkable conference. You heard Adam just sum it up. Today's message is about how the United States is here, how the United States can compete effectively and be present, engaged in a constructive way in Africa. So enormous thanks to Adam and his fantastic team at the DFC for being our co-host today. Special shout out to Worku Gachao and the DFC Africa team. We are honored to close out with Senator Coons, Administrator Barsa, Dr. Sangwe, and all of the heads of state who joined today. Thank you. So many great speakers. I also just want to say thanks to the Atlantic Council's Inimitable Africa Center led by Bronwyn Bruton and our senior fellows, Aubrey Hrubry, Ambassador Ramayad, who were critical engines behind this. The operation being run by Luke Taberski and Alyssa Harvey, along with our events and comms team. So Adam and others have underscored the significance of what happened today. The launch of a roadmap for impact, a development strategy which catalyzes $75 billion over the next 5 years to maximize development while creating sustainable growth. Africa is at the core of this strategy for DFC, for the US government, but also for the Council. We've had a tour de force with some brilliant voices today, some terrific conversations that really demonstrate that together with our friends and allies around the world, we can promote sound trade and investment across the African continent. And this is about an all-of-government effort, as you heard today. It also shows with Senator Coons here, who is the champion of the US BUILD Act, that despite the noise of an election season in the United States, that this country can act effectively, as it is, in a bipartisan way, in a sustainable way. And we're proud to have this message on our nonpartisan platform here at the Council. This also has Africa has a special place for the Atlantic Council. Under leadership of our Chairman Emeritus, Jim Jones, former National Security Advisor, Africa was our first regional center at the Atlantic Council. And we're proud of that fact. The United States partnering with Africans, along with our allies and partners, has to be at the heart of our strategy. As Ambassador Yadi likes to tell me, Africa is the future. The Chinese may have noticed this. They're present. But I think today's discussion demonstrates that we are committed to ensuring the United States is engaged differently, building true partnerships and leveraging private capital for jobs and growth and a sustainable way to create shared prosperity. And that's why we're proud to have launched the Council's own coalition today with African development banks to advance our shared interest in a secure and prosperous continent. So with that, I want to thank you to all of our distinguished guests who joined us today from across multiple time zones. Thank you to our worldwide audience, especially for those who are joining us from Africa. And on behalf of the Atlantic Council, thank you for joining us. That's a wrap.